What if you could prove that God exists, using logic alone? No scriptures, no miracles, no visions, just reason. This idea has captivated philosophers, theologians, and believers for centuries. It's called the ontological argument for God's existence, a proof built entirely on pure thought. No evidence, no observation, just the definition of God itself. It claims that the very concept of God logically requires God to exist. That's right. It doesn't just describe God, it tries to force God into reality through logic. But then came Immanuel Kant, a philosopher who challenged everything. He believed the ontological argument wasn't just flawed, it was impossible. In his groundbreaking work, Critique of Pure Reason, Kant launched a devastating attack on the very foundation of this argument. He said, bluntly, "Existence is not a predicate." And with that, he changed the course of Western philosophy forever. So, why did Kant reject the ontological argument for God's existence? And what does that tell us about the limits of human reason and the idea of God itself? Let's dig in. What is the ontological argument? The ontological argument is one of the most famous and widely debated proofs in the philosophy of religion. It tries to prove God's existence using pure logic and reason alone, without relying on any empirical evidence or physical experience. This argument was first introduced by Saint Anselm of Canterbury in the 11th century. Anselm defined God as that than which nothing greater can be conceived. In other words, God is the greatest possible being, the most perfect, all-powerful, all-knowing entity imaginable. The core claim of the ontological argument is that because existence in reality is greater than existence merely as an idea in the mind, God must exist in reality. Otherwise, God would not be the greatest conceivable being, which contradicts the very definition. Later, René Descartes, a key figure in modern philosophy, also supported a version of this argument, suggesting that existence is a necessary attribute of a perfect being like God. To put it simply, the argument goes like this. Premise 1. God is defined as the greatest conceivable being, possessing all perfections. Premise 2. It is greater to exist in reality than to exist only as a concept in the mind. Conclusion. Therefore, God must exist in reality. This is an attempt to prove God's existence a priori, that is, through reason alone, without any sensory experience. Because of this, the ontological argument is central to many discussions in philosophy of religion, metaphysics, and theology. It raises important questions about the nature of existence, the power of human reason, and whether concepts can determine reality. However, despite its logical elegance, the ontological argument has faced significant criticism, especially from Immanuel Kant, who challenged its fundamental assumptions and changed the way philosophers think about existence and proof. Immanuel Kant, one of the most influential thinkers in modern philosophy, fundamentally challenged the ontological argument, changing the course of this debate forever. Kant famously states in his Critique of Pure Reason, "Existence is not a predicate." What does this mean? Simply put, existence is not a property or quality like being red or being fast. It is not something that can be added to the concept of a thing as a defining characteristic. Instead, existence refers to the actual reality of something being there. The ontological argument tries to prove God's existence by treating existence as a necessary property of God's perfect nature. However, Kant rejects this assumption. According to him, you cannot include existence as part of the definition of a thing, because existence is not a property, but a statement about whether that thing is real in the world. Therefore, Kant argues that the ontological argument fails logically because it treats existence purely as a conceptual attribute, which cannot confirm actual existence in reality. This critique sparked a revolutionary discussion in philosophy, epistemology, and philosophy of religion. Kant showed the limits of human reason, arguing that metaphysical questions like God's existence cannot be resolved by pure logic alone. Ultimately, Kant claims that the existence of God cannot be proven solely through reason, and that experience and faith also play essential roles. Kant's critique of the ontological argument did more than just challenge a centuries-old proof. It reshaped the entire landscape of philosophy and theology. By showing that existence is not a predicate, Kant effectively argued that proofs for God's existence based solely on logic and definitions are fundamentally limited. This insight has profound implications. First, it puts a spotlight on the limits of human reason. According to Kant, while reason is powerful, it cannot by itself uncover metaphysical truths like the existence of God. There are questions that transcend pure logic and require other means, such as experience, intuition, or faith. Second, Kant's work laid the groundwork for modern philosophy's focus on epistemology, the study of how we know what we know. He emphasized that knowledge must be grounded in experience, or at least subject to the conditions of possible experience. Third, Kant's critique influenced many later philosophers and theologians. Thinkers like Alvin Plantinga and Charles Hartshorne revisited the ontological argument, offering new versions and defenses, while others accepted Kant's limitations as definitive. Importantly, Kant's ideas invite us to reconsider how we approach questions about God. Instead of relying solely on abstract logic, many now explore faith, personal experience, and practical reasoning as vital components in theological reflection. In the words of Kant himself, from Critique of Pure Reason, the understanding can intuit nothing, the senses can think nothing. Only through their union can knowledge arise. This means that understanding alone is not enough. Knowledge requires a synthesis of reason and experience. Despite Kant's powerful critique, the ontological argument has never truly disappeared from philosophical discussions. In fact, many contemporary philosophers have revisited and revised the argument, responding directly to Kant's objections. One prominent figure is Alvin Plantinga, who developed a modal version of the ontological argument that sidesteps some of Kant's key points. Plantinga argues that if it is possible that a maximally great being exists, then such a being exists in some possible world. And if it exists in any possible world, it exists in every possible world, including ours. Plantinga's approach relies heavily on modal logic, a branch of logic dealing with possibility and necessity, which Kant's original critique did not fully anticipate. Other modern thinkers, such as Norman Malcolm and Charles Hartshorne, have also contributed to reviving the ontological argument with nuanced perspectives, emphasizing the concepts of necessary existence and maximal greatness. Still, many philosophers acknowledge Kant's foundational insight, that existence cannot simply be treated as a predicate. The debate continues with this understanding at its core. This ongoing discussion highlights a key truth in philosophy. No argument, especially one as complex as the ontological argument, is ever truly settled. Instead, it evolves, shaped by new insights, logic, and the changing context of philosophical inquiry. Whether you are a skeptic or a believer, understanding Kant's critique and the modern responses to it is crucial for anyone interested in philosophy, theology, or the nature of existence itself. Kant's critique of the ontological argument remains deeply relevant in contemporary philosophy and theology. Its impact goes beyond just refuting a single argument. It shapes how we think about knowledge, existence, and faith. One reason Kant's critique endures is that it highlights the limits of purely rational proofs for metaphysical claims. Even today, many philosophers agree that certain questions, especially about God's existence, cannot be answered definitively through logic alone. This understanding encourages a more humble approach to metaphysics. It invites thinkers to acknowledge that faith, experience, and practical reasoning also play vital roles in exploring spiritual and existential questions. Moreover, Kant's ideas influence modern debates about epistemology, pushing philosophers to carefully distinguish between what can be known through reason and what lies beyond its reach. In theology, Kant's work encourages dialogue between faith and reason, urging believers and skeptics alike to explore how these dimensions interact. As Kant himself put it in Critique of Pure Reason, metaphysics is a discipline in which the human reason tries to know what it can never fully know. This quote reminds us that philosophy is as much about understanding our limitations as it is about seeking knowledge. In short, Kant's critique invites us to reflect on how we approach big questions and to appreciate the complexity involved in attempting to prove or disprove God's existence. Kant's critique not only challenges a specific philosophical proof, but also reshapes the broader conversation about the relationship between faith and reason. By demonstrating that logical arguments alone cannot definitively prove God's existence, Kant opens the door to a more nuanced understanding of belief. He encourages us to see faith not merely as blind acceptance, but as a necessary complement to reason when addressing ultimate questions. This shift has had a profound influence on modern theology, prompting scholars to explore how reason, experience, tradition, and personal conviction all contribute to religious belief. Furthermore, Kant's insistence on the limits of human reason challenges both atheists and theists to rethink how they argue about God. It suggests that neither pure skepticism nor pure rationalism can fully capture the complexity of divine existence. In philosophy, this has inspired more interdisciplinary approaches, blending metaphysics, epistemology, and even psychology to understand how humans relate to concepts like God, meaning, and purpose. Ultimately, Kant's critique reminds us that the search for truth is complex and multifaceted, requiring humility and openness to multiple ways of knowing. So, what should we take away from Kant's powerful critique of the ontological argument? First, Kant challenged the idea that existence is a real predicate, meaning he rejected the notion that we can define something into existence. This move fundamentally shifted how philosophers think about metaphysical proofs. Second, Kant argued that pure reason has limits, especially when it tries to speak about realities beyond possible experience, like the existence of God. For him, the concept of God is an idea of reason, not a demonstrable fact. Third, his critique is not anti-faith. On the contrary, it clears space for a kind of faith that isn't based solely on logic, but also on moral reasoning, personal experience, and practical necessity. And finally, Kant's legacy is alive today. His ideas continue to shape debates about metaphysics, epistemology, theology, and the philosophy of religion. I had to deny knowledge in order to make room for faith. Immanuel Kant. Critique of Pure Reason. Let that quote sit with you, because in it, we hear a voice not of denial, but of philosophical honesty. If you found this exploration thought-provoking, do not forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Do you think God's existence can be proven logically, or is it a matter of faith alone? Let's open the comment section to respectful debate, because philosophy only grows when we think together. Hit the bell icon so you never miss a deep dive like this one. More content on metaphysics, reason, belief, and the limits of knowledge is coming soon. Until then, stay curious, stay critical, and stay human.